They all walked past her like she was invisible, her voice drowned out in the noise of a world too busy to care. But one stranger didn't just stop to look, he stopped to see. And that moment didn't just change her life, it rewrote her destiny. City had always been ruthless to dreamers who had nothing but hope in their pockets, and for a young woman named Emily, every day felt like a battle against walls that refused to open. She wasn't born into privilege, nor did she carry the right connections that could have placed her in front of the opportunities she yearned for. Instead, she carried resumes in a worn-out folder and a voice that trembled with determination, even as rejection after rejection tried to silence it. She sat on the steps of a tall glass building every morning, watching men and women in suits rush past her, their heels clicking against the marble floors, their eyes fixed on their phones, as though she did not exist. Some glanced at her, but it was the kind of glance one gives a beggar on the street, pity laced with dismissal. Emily wasn't asking for money, though. She was asking for a chance. She believed she had something to offer the world: creativity, discipline, vision. But the world wasn't ready to listen. At job interviews, her words often collided with the cold stares of employers who doubted her potential simply because her clothes weren't designer, her shoes weren't polished, and her experience wasn't decorated with prestigious names. She would leave those interviews clutching her folder tighter, whispering to herself that maybe tomorrow someone would see what others failed to see. But tomorrow was no different. Her neighbors in the old apartment she rented barely acknowledged her. Even her landlord rolled his eyes whenever she asked for a few more days to pay the rent. Emily spent nights eating instant noodles and staring at the ceiling, wondering if her life was meant to fade into obscurity. The most painful part was not hunger or loneliness. It was invisibility. People didn't just reject her. They ignored her completely, as though she was transparent, as though her existence was irrelevant. And yet, despite this, a fire still flickered inside her. She still sketched designs late at night, filled notebooks with business plans, and dreamed of one day opening a small company that could employ others like her, people overlooked and underestimated. But dreams, she learned, were heavy to carry, when nobody believed in you. And just when she felt she might collapse under the weight of being unseen, life placed someone in her path who refused to look away. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where umbrellas popped open like black flowers. Across the sidewalks and hurried professionals ducked into cafes to keep their suits dry. Emily stood outside one such building, clutching her folder against her chest, her jacket soaked through. Her hair clung to her face, and her shoes made a soft, squishing sound every time she shifted her weight. She had just walked out of yet another interview that ended with the words, "We'll call you if we're interested." She knew they wouldn't call. They never did. As the crowd rushed past, one man slowed his pace. He was older, with kind eyes hidden behind rimless glasses, and he carried the presence of someone who belonged in those glass towers but wasn't blinded by their shine. He paused when he saw Emily. Most people would have assumed she was just loitering or begging for a handout, but he noticed the folder in her arms. Something about the way she held it, tight, protective, like it contained the last piece of her soul, made him stop. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked gently. Emily, startled that someone had actually spoken to her, nodded hesitantly. I was hoping to hear back from an interview," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the rain. He tilted his head, studying her, and then asked, "May I see what you're carrying?" For a moment, Emily hesitated. Nobody had ever asked to see her work. People usually dismissed her before giving her the chance. But something about his tone, genuine, patient, made her loosen her grip and open the folder. Inside were sketches of products she had designed, notes of business ideas, and neatly written resumes. The man flipped through the pages, his eyebrows rising slightly. He wasn't just skimming. He was actually reading. After a long silence, He looked back at her and said something Emily hadn't heard in years. "You've got potential. Real potential." Those words struck her like a thunderclap. She stared at him, her eyes wide, as though he had unlocked a door she had been banging on for years. "No one's ever said that to me," she whispered. He gave a small smile. "Then maybe they weren't looking close enough." That moment, the pause in the rain, the kindness in his voice, the validation she so desperately needed, was the first crack of light in the darkness that had surrounded her. She didn't know who this stranger was yet, but she knew one thing. He had seen her. The stranger introduced himself as Daniel Carter, a retired entrepreneur who had built and sold several companies in his lifetime. Unlike many in the business world, Daniel hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be overlooked, because he too had started with nothing. Something in Emily reminded him of the hunger he once carried, the hunger that could not be taught in classrooms or bought with wealth. He invited her to meet him at a nearby cafe the next day, where he asked her to show him everything she had created. Nervous but hopeful, Emily laid out her sketches and notes across the table. As he flipped through her designs, Daniel's expression grew more serious. "You don't just have ideas," he said finally. "You have vision. That's rarer than you think." Emily felt her chest tighten with emotion. All those nights of scribbling by candlelight, all those days of carrying a folder that nobody cared to open, it all mattered now. Daniel offered to mentor her. He didn't hand her money or make false promises. Instead, he gave her something far more valuable: guidance, encouragement, and the kind of belief that fuels broken wings to fly again. He taught her how to polish her business plan, how to pitch her ideas to investors, and how to present herself with confidence. At first, Emily stumbled. Years of rejection had carved deep wounds in her self-esteem, and sometimes her voice faltered during practice. But Daniel never let her quit. "The world ignored you because they didn't see you," he told her once. "Now it's time to make them listen." Slowly, Emily began to transform. She walked straighter, spoke louder, and looked people in the eye. And when she finally stepped into a real investor meeting, this time with Daniel by her side, she delivered her pitch not with fear, but with fire. Investors who once would have dismissed her now leaned forward in interest. They saw not just a young woman with sketches, but a leader with resilience and vision. Within months, Emily secured her first small investment. She started her own company in a modest office space with just 3 employees, all people who, like her, had been overlooked elsewhere. The city that once ignored her began to whisper her name and then speak it louder. Emily was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable. Years passed, and the little company Emily started grew into a respected brand. What began as sketches in a rain-soaked folder had now blossomed into products that filled stores across the country. She had gone from being ignored on the steps of tall glass buildings to having her own name etched onto one. Yet despite the success, Emily never forgot what it felt like to be unseen. She made it her mission to create opportunities for others who were overlooked. Her company became known not only for its innovation but also for its heart. Hiring the homeless, single mothers, veterans, and dreamers who had been passed over elsewhere. One day, while preparing for a keynote speech at a major business conference, Emily glanced at the crowd of thousands. For a moment, she remembered the girl she used to be, the one who sat outside in the rain, clutching a folder while the world walked past. Her throat tightened as she began her speech. "I was ignored by everyone," she told the audience, her voice strong yet emotional. "But one stranger chose to see me, and that changed everything. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to look past what the world overlooks, to see potential where others see nothing." The room erupted in applause, but Emily's eyes searched for one person. Daniel Carter, now older and frailer, sat in the front row, smiling with quiet pride. After the event, Emily approached him and hugged him tightly. "You gave me more than a chance," she whispered. "You gave me back myself." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, Emily. You already had everything inside you. I just reminded you to believe in it." That night, as Emily returned to her office and signed paychecks for the hundreds of employees who now depended on her, she felt tears fill her eyes. She had become what she always dreamed of, a builder, a leader, a voice for the invisible. The girl the world once ignored was now impossible to overlook. And it all began because one stranger chose to see what everyone else refused to. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest act of belief can change someone's entire destiny. Don't just scroll past people. See them, support them, and remind them of their worth. Share this story, spread kindness, and be the stranger who makes someone visible again. Subscribe to Kindness Vibes for more stories that prove one act of compassion can rewrite a life.